Good morning, good afternoon, a very early morning if you're on the West Coast. I am Cate Luzio, founder and CEO of Luminary and the host of Goaldigger here on LinkedIn Live every week. And today, just for everyone's awareness, if you're listening now, watching later, we have two guests today. So our first guest, very near and dear to my heart, and we'll get a little bit of that story. So Surbi Lal, who was the former Chief Impact Officer at Luminary, also a current Luminary Advisory Board member, and so many other things that it is like a list that I'm going to actually turn over to her because her story is so unique in this world. What she was doing prior to Luminary, what she's doing now, and what she's going to be doing in the future. So welcome, Surbi.
Thanks, Cate. It's fun to be on this side of the of the LinkedIn Live. I'm often on the other side with my Sips and Leadership series, so it's kind of nice to be on this side of the screen, as it were. So, as you know, Cate, as you said, I'm multi-hyphenate, multi-passionate. It's in some ways hard to roll up all of the things, but I would say the thing that keeps them all connected is really striving towards a better future of work, and a more equitable future of work, and what that looks like and what that really requires, which is a really good sense of leadership. And I have been able to be working in multiple sectors, which a lot of people haven't been able to do, right? So nonprofit, for-profit, as well as education. And one of my educational institutions was a public institution, so maybe I can sneak in government too. But really, with that, thinking about all of these spaces and conversations I get to sit in, it really occurred to me that we can do a much better job of supporting people in the world of work. And in particular, I realized that there's just so much opportunity to make work better, and make work more pleasant for people, because in general, and I know this from talking to job seekers, people want to work. They want to work. They want to do a good job. They want to be at a place that they're valued. They want to contribute. And sometimes organizations aren't set up for that. And sometimes managers aren't set up for that. And leaders don't always know how to do that. And so there's lots of problems to solve, which makes me the multi-hyphenate that I am. And so with that, I teach at NYU. I teach graduate students a core management and leadership class, as well as a workplace effectiveness class, because all of these are leaders who are going to go out into the world in social impact. And quite frankly, from a selfish standpoint, that means that all of us are going to benefit, myself included. And then I work as a consultant with teams and organizations so that they can really work better together. And so that's really immediate for a lot of teams to say, oh, we didn't know this. Now I can work better with my team. I'm happier. I have seen, one of my recent clients, they're just in such a better place than they were a year and a half ago, even with restructuring, even through the pandemic. It's a nonprofit organization. They raised the most money they had. And part of that is because they're working very, very well together. And that team piece in the consulting space is really important. And then programmatically, I work as a senior advisor with Jobs for the Future, and think about how we impact corporate and on their corporate leadership team, and how we impact corporate entities so that they can build better, more equitable futures of work and equitable economic advancement for their workers. And then, because somehow I have more time, I'm a mid-career PhD student, and my work is really centered on how we make workplaces a place of belonging and community and learning, and places of growth and engines of growth that aren't just economic growth, but that are around our human capacity.
So all tied together, including the PhD, which we were so excited when you were still working with Luminary and you came to me and said, my bucket list has a PhD included on it, and it's happening a little bit earlier, but I want to do it. And I think that's just an incredible thing. In addition to everything else you're doing, you're also a working mother. And kind of balancing all of these different things. But one of the, I think, more remarkable things that I see, and we're going to talk about each of these, is that you have been talking about the future of work well before the great resignation, the great renewal, the great reexamination, all of this. I remember the first time we met in that little coffee shop, you were talking about the future of work and why you were so not just passionate. This was a purpose for you and part of what you wanted to do as you change the world. As you think about what you've been seeing with clients, pre-pandemic and certainly now and then in the future, how do you think companies need to sort of evolve around that? Their not only their perception about what makes a good team work together, but more importantly, how we look around flexibility and certainly just in general, how we're better teams, communicate better, enjoy working together, and certainly to your point around the nonprofit client you mentioned, raise more money, make more money.
Yeah. So I have been interested in this for a long time because really many of the people I worked with were the future of work, right?
Mm.
So I sat at these intersections of job seekers, graduate students, undergraduate students, alumni, mid-career professionals, encore career professionals, and I knew that what they were telling me behind closed doors in terms of what they wanted out of their work and what was going to make them successful was different than what I was hearing when I had conversations with employers. And frankly, I heard so many horror stories of people in terms of what was happening to them in their workplace as they were looking to make a career change, as they were looking to move into a different space. And so it was clear that we had a gap, right? There's a gap in terms of what people want, and there's a gap in talent, right? So we're all losing on talent because people are spending their energy dealing with uncomfortable workplaces. They're dealing with managers that maybe don't know how to manage. And it's not necessarily just because a manager doesn't know how to manage. Oftentimes, managers aren't given the tools. And one of the things that I think is really important is that people get time to do that,
Right.
right? There are some structural pieces to a calendar that if you are a manager, you need to protect.
Mm.
And I think a lot of people don't have organizations that are set up to do that. And so it has been this sticky problem that we need to fix. And in
Yeah.
fact, the great reshuffle, resignation, reevaluation, whatever you want to say about it, is forcing the issue with a lot of places. So I think about maybe in the summer, there was this, we're all going to start back in September and everybody's going to be full time. And you saw a lot of companies roll that back
Hmm.
because their employees said, then I'm out.
Right.
And what that says to me is that the leadership in that company, the people who are making those decisions, did not consult their employees.
Mhm.
What a miss.
Right.
What
Exactly.
a miss, right? What a miss. Was there a survey sent out? Were there conversations had? What are some of those things that can happen? And I think that for the first time in my lifetime, at least, workers have much more voice. And so that is, I think, a trend that we'll continue to see. In fact, we saw it last week when the first Starbucks
Right.
unionized, right, in Buffalo. So we've seen workers organize in sectors that would never have been thought of as union shops.
Hmm.
Google, right? You've seen this
Yeah.
movement in
Exactly.
Google and in tech to unionize. And part of that means that workers are not being treated well. They
Mm.
want more of a voice and they're not getting it through other channels. And I don't know that collective bargaining is the right thing for everybody, but worker voice and what workers are saying in your organization is right to listen to. It
Absolutely.
may not always be the right thing for everybody, and everybody's going to have a different opinion. But I think the days of organizations being fully top down and not listening are numbered.
Yeah, you'll see. I mean, this because of my background. I mean, you saw JP Morgan really focused on getting people back, and many people want to come back too. And they just want that flexibility, but having made sort of the stake in the ground. We're having this conference in January. It's what we're doing, and everyone's going to be person. And then yesterday or the day before, it's like, no, we're now going to go on Zoom. And they were, because they finally started to listen, right? It wasn't around, and nothing against JP Morgan. It was your people, your vendors, your partners, your clients are also saying, is this the right decision? We've got to start listening, not just, hey, to the, I call it sanitized and scrub information that gets to the senior level, because oftentimes when leadership, especially at large organizations, by the time that material gets to them, it's been scrubbed and sanitized for the better story. We've got to stop scrubbing and sanitizing so you get the real story, and you can make decisions based on that employee feedback and engagement.
And you have to make space for those to happen. I mean, there's too many companies that are run out of fear as opposed to collaboration. And so when people are running organizations, any sort of organization, through fear, it's not a healthy workplace. Full stop.
Right. Yeah. And we've seen that too, right? We've seen that Better.com, which was the mortgage company, he sort of fired 900 people on Zoom and led that in a fearsome. And then multiple senior executives just said, I'm out of here. This is not the culture. And I think, Surbi, since I've known you for 3.5 years now, the other part of what you talk about within Future of Work and what you do day in and day out, and all of the things that you work on is culture. Right, is creating the right culture where you have that space, where people have capacity, where there are those brave conversations able to be had. When you think about companies, whether they're small, medium, and large, and maybe you're starting from scratch, right? Because you're trying to just overturn what's been happening. How do we create or begin to create those cultures where there are those brave conversations that are able to be sort of just, let's talk?
Yeah. So the number one thing I would say is, and this is an issue that I feel really, really strongly about, is that everybody who is in an authority position needs to get really comfortable with a few questions. What can I do better to support you? What am I doing now that is not helpful? And need to ask them over and over and over again. Because if you don't ask as the person who has the power, people are not going to tell you. I don't care how many times you say, I want feedback, give me feedback. They are not going to tell you. So what's one thing that I can do better? What's one thing where I can be helpful? How can I work better to support you? These are questions that if you are in a position of authority, i.e. you're a manager, you're the leader of the company, you're the founder of your organization, you have to ask those questions, and you have to maybe even ask them differently. So oftentimes, and there are some studies that show this, is that leaders think they're asking for feedback. And when I say leaders, I mean people who are in these authority power positions think they're asking for feedback. And because the culture is one where that their employees don't know whether they're going to get some sort of retribution for sharing, their employees never share the feedback. Right. So then what happens is the person in power says, or with more power says, hey, I keep asking for feedback. I don't get any. I think I'm doing a fine job. Right. And the people who report to that person, for example, are saying, oh my God, I cannot work with this person. Right. So I think it really is incumbent, upon the person who has people who report to them to ask these questions and to say, I'm not perfect, right? Yeah. I'm not perfect. I don't have all the answers. And what that requires is giving up power. And in this country and in this society, giving up power, as we think about the common definitions of power, is not easy. However, it's so important to do.
So important. I mean, I'll just use some of, when we were working together, right? I loved that you would give me consistent feedback, right, or constant feedback, right, about ways that I could, whether it was, changing my tone or understanding situations differently, and then me being able to share that with the team that you could give me that feedback. And did I agree with just like any in my old life in banking? No, but one of the things that I think that managers and leaders can do is share the feedback that they receive so that you can create a more open culture where there is that, focus on 360. At JP Morgan, that was a big component of my, 7 or 8 years there. And after every year end, I would go into my team and say, here's the feedback that I got. And I want you to understand the feedback that I'm getting, how I'm trying to get better, how that pertains to the business and you as staff, but that also that we create a culture of openness, right? And that culture, there is no fear, there is no retaliation, there is no retribution. And I think, we've seen this in tech in particular, we've seen it in finance. That is the fear. I don't want to speak up. My boss doesn't want me to speak up. And when I do, there is some type of retaliation.
For sure. And I think that it was easier for me to give you feedback, right, than it may have been for some of my colleagues. And I think there's also a practice in giving feedback. There is positionality around giving feedback in terms of where you sit in an organization. And it isn't easy, right? We also don't we live in a we live in a work world where feedback is only happens during your performance review, and in fact it should be happening all the time.
All the time.
And so we're not practiced at it, right? We're not practiced at ways to give feedback continually to make it part of an everyday conversation. And that's one of the reasons that I think it's so important for people managers to really open that conversation, and not just open it once, but open it time and time and time again.
One of the things you mentioned earlier, and I think it's a key word, is capacity, right? So organizations don't often, in structures and hierarchies, don't often give that time for people to have capacity. One of the things that I'm seeing within our team now at Luminary is like, I have this non-negotiable hour that I'm going to do X. So don't try to book it. Cate, you can't have it. This is non-negotiable, which I love because they're setting boundaries. But oftentimes we are seeing this because many people are still, for the most part, still in some capacity working from home or working remotely. They get up, they put their they put something on, and they are on the screen from morning until night, and they have no additional capacity to do anything else. They're over zoomed, they're just fatigued. They may have children, they may have they may be caregiving. How do you think about, when you talk to companies that you work with, but also just in general, your students, yourself, creating that capacity?
Yeah, you read the statistics around over the pandemic, you would think people have been working the same, but in fact, a lot of people are working much more, partially because of the expectations. So one of the things that I think everybody should do, and the new year is a great chance to do this, is to sit down and say, here are the hour, what are our expectations, right? So what are our expectations as a team? And so some of my consulting work, I've done these launch and relaunch conversations. And there's 2 hours with a team to say, what is it that we expect? What's going right now? What's going well? What do we want to continue? What's not going so well? And do we want to set some guardrails, right?
Mm,
Like, maybe it makes sense if you have people with a lot of caregiving responsibilities, or not even caregiving responsibilities to themselves, like
mm,
going for a run or going for a walk or doing whatever, to say, you know what, we are going to decide that we're going to have meetings from 10 to 3, 10 to 4,
mm.
whatever time makes sense for that team. And at those times, you need to be available for a meeting.
Right.
And outside of those times, we are not going to ask you to be a part of a meeting. Now, it becomes infinitely harder if you're client facing, because then your clients want all sorts of time. But I also think you could go to clients and say, our best times for meetings, if you want our whole team there or a subset of our team, is 10 to 4. When can we meet?
Right.
To set those boundaries. And then I think, and this is hard for me, is like deciding what your end of the day is and really being at the end of the day. So one of the things that I do is I switch spots in my home for the
Oh,
different places, for the different work that I do. So if I'm doing studying, um, if I'm studying or if I'm doing other certain pieces of work, I sit in another chair. And if I'm doing like my work for consulting or program development work, I sit actually in this chair where I am now. So I switch spots because just psychologically for me, it helps my brain calibrate to this is the work that I'm doing here. So it can be as simple as if you have two chairs around your table, you sit in one seat for certain work and another seat and another for your other work. And that's even for things like, a lot of people don't have multiple devices that they can work off of. That's another way. If you have multiple devices, like I'm closing this one. So I'm closing my
right,
work
right.
laptop to
Yeah,
then get on my other laptop to like online shop or do whatever it is that you are doing, research, borrowing your books from the library, looking for recipes, all the things that you might do that are not necessarily work related, but not everybody has that. So I think switching seats can be
exactly.
a really really good one. Another one is just getting up and walking around. I was joking with with one of our neighbors. They were saying they really missed their commute because it allowed them to detach from their
Yeah,
workday. And I was joking with him and I was saying, maybe you should just ride the elevator down to the lobby and then ride the elevator back up. It's not going to take a lot of time, but it's this really physical reminder that I've finished one thing and I'm doing something else. So similar to switching seats, it is deciding what that thing is that helps you know that there's a boundary. But for teams, I think teams need to make some collective decisions, right? And it might be things like, listen, and I think a lot of parents have this. They want to protect kind of the dinner time, 5 to 8, 6 to 9, dinner time, bedtime hours to say, don't bother me unless it's an emergency at that
mhm,
time. But know that I will eat, I will check that before opening a business the next day.
right.
So what are I think a lot of people assume that other people know the rules that they want. And so part of having a launch or relaunch conversation is really to get those out in the open.
Yeah, I those are all such good, I mean, such and easy tips, right? These aren't hard things that we all can't do, even if you're in a studio apartment in New York City, right? Or wherever you live. You can do some of these things. You can ride the elevator. You can set, I think the meeting thing is a great one, Serby, because otherwise you can be, and I've heard this time and time again from our members, from companies that we work with. I'm in meetings from 8 o'clock in the morning.
You're in meetings from 8 o'clock. I know what your calendar looks like.
Yes, I am. Right, but my way of working shouldn't be the same way as someone else,
That's
right?
right.
So that's the other thing that I think what works for you doesn't mean that's going to work for someone else. So and Slack, right? We're now on Slack. And so what I've told my team is, listen, I may be on Slack all night, but if your notifications are turned off, great. I know that you won't respond until the morning. That's just how I am. I got to get it all out. But setting those boundaries, right? It's all about boundaries, or even saying to your boss, I can't start meetings until 9, 10, for whatever reason that is. My productivity is not going to change. In fact, if my productivity will likely increase
Right.
if you
Right.
give me that flexibility.
That's right. And I would say to other people too is Slack has a schedule send, the Google Suite has a schedule send. I write a lot of emails late at night and nobody would know because they are schedule send for the next morning. I mean, now everybody knows, it's secrets out. But I don't send them at that time because even if I've told somebody I don't expect you to respond, psychologically there is still this sense of, oh my gosh, I should respond. So
Great
make
tip.
schedule send your friend, right? Like the schedule send is so easy. It is so easy and so helpful. And it gives the person who's writing their message this peace of mind that it's going to go out, right? That it's done, it's going to go out. And that's important because if you're a late night owl and you want to get that stuff done because it's when you have a quiet moment, you want to know that it's going to go out and you can probably sleep better. And if you are that person who wakes up, you don't want to come into a slew of like 30 emails. Let those go out at 8, at between after 8 o'clock in the morning so that folks can see that. I think it's one of the best features that's been added to a lot of the platforms is the schedule.
You're still giving me feedback, which is great. And now I will put that into practice because, I'm just lazy on some of these platforms. I'm like, whatever. Okay. But see, that's great. I mean, I think that's important, right? And having the space to be able to say that to someone is important. And I think you lead by example, right, Serbi? And that's one of the reasons in your as a professor, as a leader, as an advisor. And by the way, we forgot to mention one other thing that you're doing. You are a Verizon small business expert for their digital ready program for small businesses. So in addition to everything else that you're doing, you're also doing that. And so because we're seeing an incredible amount of small businesses started by, in particular, women and underrepresented communities, actually way more than even pre-pandemic for lots of reasons, the great renewal, resignation, et cetera, necessity. What are you doing on that platform, and how are you leveraging your expertise for small businesses?
Yeah, it really all ties into a better future of work. So whether you're working for yourself, whether you're working for a small business, a startup, a large Fortune 100 company, for me, it's all about how do we create better systems. And I think this is where founders have a really unique opportunity, which is to focus on culture. And a lot of what I have heard from founders is it's not something they think about. And in fact, I think it is a really interesting and unique advantage for small and medium sized businesses, particularly now, particularly when people are open to rethinking what their work might look like,
Mm-hmm.
that an organization that's smaller can often change their culture more quickly, right? You think about you've worked at huge banks.
Mm-hmm.
How much time does it take to change something
Right.
in an organization of that size? And it's not about judgment, that's about size,
Size.
right? And small and medium sized businesses can change more quickly. They are more nimble. And so part of working on the Verizon Small Business Project was really to say, listen, small businesses and medium sized businesses, you can go remote, you can do it well. And in some ways, it could give you a competitive advantage. And I think, in particular, at this time, when people are reconsidering what they want out of work and how work fits into their life and how they want their life to encompass work, there are just these opportunities that are open to small businesses to be able to do that. And I think there's some real benefits, right? There's some real benefits. You no longer need to have a brick and mortar space.
Mm-hmm.
You can, or you can have a brick and mortar space and have a digital presence like Luminary does to reach so many more people. But you have to understand that working remotely is not the same. You have to do a better job of building culture and connection. You have to do, as you are the founder, the leader of people leader, like they're different tactics as doing it remotely. And some people's jobs, and you know this from Luminary, some people's jobs are easier to shift to remote than other people's
Yes.
jobs. And so also being really clear about what that looks like.
Yeah, I think oftentimes small businesses don't think about many of the things that you talk about. They think, well, when I'm bigger, I don't have that. I'm not at that scale. But actually, when you start, whether you're a solopreneur and you're hiring your first person to you're making changes you may have had, and we saw this, Serbi. I mean, so many small businesses and startups said, I had office space, we're now all remote. But how do you not lose that team collaboration, the team building, the effectiveness, and that culture, which I think for some companies it's gone greatly, and others they have not focused on this because it just hasn't been. So I will remind everyone, if you want to learn more about Serbi on this. It's the Verizon Small Business Digital Ready platform. It's an incredible platform. It's free, and it is dedicated and focused on small business owners. Serbi, remind everyone where they can find you, but also your LinkedIn Live Sips and Leadership and when that happens.
Yeah, great. So I play most on LinkedIn and on IG. And I, on LinkedIn, have been for the last a little bit over a year now, running a series called Sips and Leadership, which is social impact, public service, and leadership. There are so many stories, good stories of leadership that are out there, and I really use that as a platform to bring those to life. So we have lots of things in the world that we can make better, and that is the social impact piece. So whether you are a board member, whether you are working at a nonprofit, or whether you are working at a social enterprise, these are the people that I talk to, and there's so many good stories of leadership. And I think often in popular media, you see either like these scandal stories of leadership, which are just horrible, leadership gone wrong, which is important. We should learn from leadership gone wrong. But there are also so many stories of leadership gone right. And part of it is also bringing different voices into the conversations of leadership. So I often say that I think we are still in the hangover of the great man theory of leadership, and part of Sips and Leadership is a movement to overthrow that.
Well, I love it. It is a great show, and you do have some all of the individuals that you have are incredible stories, and not just their stories of leadership, of where they come from and how they've built their career. So I would encourage all of you that if you don't know Serbi, to go to her LinkedIn and check it out, because not in addition to everything else that you do, you are an incredible thought leader. You are, to me, a phenomenal mentor. And I am so lucky that we crossed paths and through Maribel Lara. So
Right.
shout out
To her.
And that you continue your work with Luminary on our board. And we're so excited to see what happens for you in 2022. So we'll have to bring you back. And by the way, if you want to know anything about future of work, follow Serbi. She is incredible and has been talking about this long before the last 2 years. So thank you, Serbi. Have a wonderful holiday, and we'll see you in the new year, hopefully.
Yes, indeed. And you too have a great holiday. I hope you get some well-deserved downtime. So
I'm going to do scheduled send. So there you go.
Great. Perfect.
All right.
All right.
See you soon. Bye,
Bye.
Serbi. All right. We're going to bring on our next guest, Damali. Hello.
Hi, I'm so happy to see you, Cate. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. It is so good to see you in person. I mean, on Zoom, but on a screen. And it is wonderful to have you on Goaldigger. I know this is a long time coming on both sides. We've had a bunch of reschedules, but you are here. And I, as you know, and we've been on panels together, I never do read bios. In particular for women, I want them to share their stories. So this is Goaldigger. This is about finding your voice. Can you share a little bit of, because you do so many things, it's hard to it's kind of hard to even say your bio. Can you tell the audience a little bit about what you do, the multiple things that you're doing, and what kind of got you there from the kind of the beginning to where you are now?
Certainly. I usually like to give an introduction that's 6 words. So in 6 words, I would say lawyer, mediator, educator. I'm Olivia Pope. So those are my 6 words.
I'm Olivia Pope. Amazing. Yes. Okay. So what does that even mean?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the short version is that I am a fixer, right? And so my background is in conflict resolution, and I focus on mediation, arbitration, ombuds work. I am also an educator. So from training companies, individuals, organizations in conflict resolution and de-escalation. So things that everyone needs at every company, Cate. So how to have difficult conversations, how to effectively communicate, how to what's the art of conflict resolution? Like, how do you help people to negotiate better for themselves or for others? So these are the types of things that I work on, and that companies bring me and my team in to do. I'm also an adjunct professor at Howard University School of Law, which is my alma mater, where I also teach basic mediation training. And I exclusively mediate and arbitrate at JAMS, which is the most prestigious global ADR firm in the world. So that's in a nutshell kind of like what I do. But who I am, I'm from Washington, D.C. I'm the oldest of 7 children. I'm a mom of 2. I'm a drummer, a percussionist, if you will. And I love improv. So I studied at the Upright Citizens Brigade, and I like to write greeting cards, among other things. So that's like a whole picture of me.
And you have a phenomenal shoe collection. I remember sitting next to you on that panel at Luminary, like, oh wow, amazing. So you are like Olivia Pope in that sense of the fashion. I want to dig into a couple of things, and these past 22 months, which is crazy, 21 months, whatever the number is. There have been so many things, right? We've talked about it around, there's not only the pandemic, there is the racial injustices that continue to happen. And there was, George Floyd and multiple murders of other young and Black, the Black community. You had an election. You had violence against the AAPI community. You have return to work. You have the goal line moving consistently from companies like, we're going in, we're not, we're going back, we're not. So much is happening in the world. And leaders in particular have a lot to deal with. And we were just talking about that with our conversation with Serbi. How are you thinking, or how are your clients thinking about, because I can imagine conflict resolution right now is at probably some of its highest.
Absolutely. And one thing that the pandemic and every other incident or situation that you referred to brought was more conflict on top of conflict. And as well, people were dealing with one situation, another one would arise. And so this, I think for the first time in a long time, something that impacted everyone. The pandemic has impacted probably every single person in the world in some way, shape, or form. And so with respect to your question regarding leaders, it's a lot. It's a lot to navigate. If you're running a company like you are, if you're running a company that's in person, if you're running a company that's hybrid, if you're running a company that's always been remote, but now the whole world is remote, like, how do you navigate all these things? And so a few things that I've seen as far as trends or questions that come up are as follows. One, what's the best way to communicate with our people? And when I say our people, we're talking about people who depend on you. So if people that work for you, people who work with you, your clients, your consumers, your partners, like, how do you communicate and how do you navigate an ever moving target, right? Because once we get to one point, then there's a next point. And so my typical advice is to be transparent. Is to think about like the message, think about how it, what it's going to reflect about you, and to think about how, so I'll say it this way. Also, not every fight is everyone's fight, right? And so, for example, you mentioned like, a few of the different types of social justice movements and civil rights issues. And sometimes brands would get dinged for not saying something, but maybe that brand is not known for being political or not known for being, like maybe they only focus on issues dealing with climate change, right? And so the point is just kind of making sure that you're being transparent, but also true to your brand, true to yourself, true to your mission, and then thinking about your people and those different tranches of people and how you need to communicate with them and relate to them. And also remembering that even though it's a moment in time, it's something that could be referred to for decades to come. And so how do you want to show up? For people transitioning back to work, going back to the office, that has been one of the biggest things that companies have, big and small, have brought us in to do, is to help people like navigate that transition, because no one is going to be the same person they were before the world changed. There's not a single person. Right. And I know that, you've seen this, we've all seen this with the way that different people related to the pandemic. People
Mhm.
were quarantined, people didn't see family members. It was hard for introverts, it was hard for extroverts.
Right.
There are a lot of impacts. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like there's finally more discussion about mental health and
Mhm.
how mental health is impacted, and how people need to be aware that every individual is three-dimensional, right? And so you may have only seen, the amazing Cate in the workplace, but when Kate's not at work, maybe Cate is this person outside of work, or maybe she cares about these things. And so how do we bring all those pieces together and give people the space and grace that they need to navigate what we can see and what we can't see?
I love that. And when we think about having these conversations, and you've led some of these dialogues with the luminary community just around, I mean, you had just going back to many of these things that we've talked about, but not everybody is equipped to be able to even start those conversations. Not everybody is equipped to be able to share their story or how they're feeling. Can you share some tips or advice on how to even begin some of those conversations? Because I think even now, almost 2 years into this, and we're still saying, should people be allowed to work from home? And what about working parents and caregivers? And how do we know they're still working hard? Uh, I mean, crazy, but can you talk about maybe some tips and advice that you might, at least to even start to have that discussion?
Absolutely. The first thing we have to do is bust open this myth that just because of the way that one person would do something means that everyone should do it the same way. And so that's key, because oftentimes I hear, well, if he had a problem with me, why didn't he just tell me? Because I would have told him if I had a problem with him. Let's just stop that for a moment. There are two gentlemen by the last names of Thomas and Kilman back in the 70s, I believe, who came up with this theory that there are 5 different types of communication conflict response styles. So meaning that there are 5 different ways or main ways that people can respond to conflict. One way is that way. If I have a problem, I'm going to go tell someone. There are 4 other ways that are common and are used even as frequently, if not more frequently, for a person who's having some type of conflict. So
Mm.
the first tip is to familiarize yourself with the 5 conflict communication styles. Here they are: competing, compromising, accommodating, avoiding, and collaborating. So if you take a chance to look this up,
Yeah.
you'll learn that somebody might be avoidant. They may be conflict avoidant. So their style, their predominant style, how they react most of the time may not be to go in and demand justice or to say what have you, because that's not their style. Their style may be avoidant to buy time, to reduce tension, to get more information before they switch to a different. So it's really important for people to understand that we all have different styles. We all use different styles. And that just because you would do something in response to a particular situation doesn't necessarily mean that someone else would have the same response style. So that to me is like huge, because communication has input and output, right? So right now I'm focusing on the output. For the input part of it, listening. Everyone talks about active listening and active listening, active listening. We have to actively listen. Well, what does that even mean? Like, what do those two terms mean together? I think listening to me has to have 2 parts: reductive listening and kind of listening to kind of think about how you're going to solve a problem. So I want you to listen, to just listen, meaning to be there, to show up, to be engaged and not have an agenda for how you're going to solve the problem. And then I also want you to practice listening to solve a problem, right? Oftentimes, as leaders of companies, as people who are working in various capacities, we're all thinking about problem solving. People come to us with a problem. Every company that exists in the world is existing to meet a need or solve a problem. Like
Right.
that's like business 101, right, Cate? Like that's
Yep.
business 101. And
Yep.
so if so then you're trying to think about how to solve a problem, but sometimes people solve problems before they have a good understanding of the full perspective, the full gambit of the issue. And so oh my goodness. So what I think is really important, the second tip is to actively listen, and to do that by slowing things down, like giving people a chance to tell you everything that's going on. If the time that they approach you isn't the right time, instead of giving them a little bit of yourself, let them know what's going on. If you're rushing to someone else, if you have another meeting, if you have another call, and that's what's on your mind, articulate that so that the person on the other side isn't just assuming, oh, they don't want to talk to me, or maybe it's about that time that X happened, and they're just kind of putting together this whole answer that may have nothing to do with why you're in a rush, right?
Right.
And so just so to actively listen, give people a chance to give you their perspective, to share with you, slow things down, so that there's an opportunity for you to think about it, think about the answer, think about what you want to do, think about how you want to show up in the moment. And don't feel that pressure. I think, especially in Western cultures, there is this pressure to kind of like have this almost rhythmic dance-like communication where there are not enough pauses and taking the time to slow down. But I think those are two tips that I would throw out there: learning your communication styles, focusing on how to actually truly listen actively.
And it doesn't always mean when you're listening that you have to respond right away, right? I think that's also part of the culture, right? It's like, okay, great, I've heard what you said. Now I have to respond. It can be, I've heard what you said. Let me take that away, digest it, and then come back to you with either a response, more questions, more dialogue. And that's slowing things down. If we actually start to do that, then communication can not only be more effective, it can be more impactful and likely more productive in any type of, negotiation, conflict resolution, or strategy, right? As you're thinking and brainstorming, I often tell my team, my voice is loud and it is strong, but it's not the only voice. So don't let it be the only voice. Bring your voice, bring your ideas. And if there's silence, that's not helpful either.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%.
So this is such a you've obviously, this is well before the pandemic. You've been doing this. Is how we met through a panel at Luminary, and was blown away just around the business, your background. I want to take a little bit of a step back, because this is not a path for everyone. What led you to this, not just the industry, but what you're doing? And certainly you have a very strong voice. You have a very effective voice. What brought you here? We know you went to Howard, which, as someone who went to Maryland and Georgetown, I love Howard. It was like smack dab in the middle. But where did you find this voice, Damali? Because it's such an important voice.
I think I would attribute it first to my family. My mom always said I could do anything and be anyone I wanted to become. And then I mentioned I was the oldest of 7, so I was like in the middle of my parents and 6 siblings. And so I learned at an early age to advocate for myself, advocate for others, to mediate. I was literally in the middle. And then to try to find, I always felt like I could see, like different sides, different perspectives. I didn't have to always understand them, or agree with them rather, but I could see it. And I think that was important in maintaining the peace, right? Just so in any situation, just kind of being that voice of reason, to say, okay, what's going on? What do you think about this? Well, what about that? What about this? I'm not trying to convince you to see it this way. I also felt like as an attorney, it was really important to just be very meticulous. So to read a lot, to understand what was happening, to understand what your clients want and what they're looking for. And also to recognize that, like, for anyone who, works in a professional capacity, meaning that they have some specialized skill, the person who you're helping may not know all the questions to ask you, right? They may not know. So part of it is like being able to, anticipate what their needs are and help them to navigate it, which also means thinking about potential conflicts that could arise. I think all of us no one anticipated how long the pandemic would go on, how much it would impact us, that it would shut down New York and other places. I mean, like, no one could have foreseen that, even in whatever hypothetical quant model anyone could have put together.
Right, exactly.
Right, Cate? Like, no one could have predicted, how long, how intense, how impactful. And so as far as finding my voice, what I want to say for anyone who's tuning in right now, who's like, well, I'm not in the middle of parents and 6 kids, or, like no one ever told me, do this, do that, is what I love about Luminary and the community that you've created, Cate, and many other communities that, like the Georgetown, the Howard, I went to Spelman, like all these sororities. So all these types of communities that are supporting, especially for women, for business owners, for entrepreneurs in general. I think that it's important to lean into your community and to figure out where the different strengths and weaknesses lie. Because if you do that, maybe, one person isn't good at this, but somebody else is going to be good at that. And they can help you, kind of supplement or even complement at times too, what you bring to the table. And that's what I love about Luminary. I mean, I was there once before the world shut down. Right?
I know.
And I joined after the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
Started, meaning like I was there in January with you. I joined after it started. I'd done some other panels with you, and I still joined the community, even though I didn't know when the building would reopen, even though I didn't know when I would see you again, because I just, that one experience, that first time I was there, I really did feel like a community of thought leaders, of conflict resolvers, of people who were really trying to work together and to figure out how to support each other. And it wasn't just lip service. It was just like, okay, what do you bring to the table? This is what I bring. How can we collaborate? And that's what I love about people who, the question about your voice, because your voice can, it can be born with it, or it can grow and develop over time.
Totally grow and develop. And also, I think we have to give people space for that, right?
We do.
And 5 years ago, I was a banker. I'm still at heart a banker, but my voice has changed. My who I am has not changed, but my voice has changed. What I'm able to talk about, what I talk about, how I'm focused on things. And I think we have to, in every organization, and small, medium, and large, you're a business owner, you're climbing the corporate ladder, you're a university student, we have to give that space for people's voice to evolve and change, and also for opinions to change. I'm seeing that more. I'm seeing that people want that, again, open space, brave space to be able to have those conversations without retaliation, right? Without retribution. And we talked about this right before with Serbi, is that we've got to give teams the ability to do that. We also have to give leaders that space. Oftentimes, and you talked about it, if a brand didn't jump right in to talk about something, there was so much criticism. How come they're not saying, well, maybe that's not something that has been or isn't, not necessarily important, but that's not what they talk about. We have to also give that opportunity to leaders. And I'm sure in your line of work, you're not just talking to teams, you're talking to leaders around how do they crisis, conflict, whatever you want to call it, deal with these, and the amount or the volume of those this past year, I can imagine, has been just overwhelming.
Yeah, it has been, I think, for a few different reasons. One, just uncertainty. So not having any predictability into various markets, delays, like, everyone's favorite phrase is supply chain and all these things that are happening, right? Like there are words I never thought I would hear together, like social and distancing, like, all these words, right? And then also just people wanting to show up for their employees, right? Thinking about the fact that they, that if there's uncertainty in their market, then what are they going to do? How are they going to manage and navigate the responsibilities they have to compensate their employees? On the other hand, you have industries that were not impacted as greatly. In fact, that did a lot better because they were industries that, I don't want to say that benefited from the pandemic, but, that still thrived during the pandemic. And so you have people who may not have as much free time as before, or who may have now be working from home, and there isn't that separation between work and life. And, work-life balance, as we all know, has always been an elusive, idea that no one has seemed to be able to figure out on a consistent basis for a long period of time. But I think, with leaders of organizations now, and not just leaders, because you mentioned students too, like imagine paying to go to school and schools close, and now you're back home. And then there's, imagine professors who've taught for 30 years in person, and now they have to figure out how to teach a Zoom class and translate what they do in person to Zoom. I mean, it was it wasn't, continues to be a learning experience. I think, the net of many of most of it is that, people are doing well with it. Like now this is something that they can navigate with ease. Whereas maybe 2 years ago, no one thought that, we would have, LinkedIn lives, right? Like, and so what I love is, is this different way to answer your question, is all the creativity and innovation that I've seen, not just leaders, but individuals, organizations, institutions incorporate to really find, their voices, if you will, in a different way, or highlight what they bring to the table, or problem solve in a different way.
I like the problem solving, right? Because I think in the past it was just go, 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 right? And now, and even for me as a leader, as a business owner, I tell people all the time, if the pandemic had not happened, and listen, it has been hard, it is hard, but silver linings, it allowed me the space, just think strategically, where were we going to go? It also allowed me to see new skills, or skills that I would never have been able to see out of my team, because we were just go, go, go. And to think about new ways to build a business, to communicate to not only our community, but also within. And so, giving people that space, the grace to be able to have that. And you're right, we've seen a lot of creativity and a lot of innovation. So it has been hard for everyone. It has been harder for some. The women of color have been disproportionately impacted and continue to be. But some of that has also created new opportunities. And I think you're right around the community aspect is, how do you tap into those communities? How do you make your asks? How do you help others? I've seen more of that than I think ever in my career right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's great about it is that I think it's here to stay.
Yeah.
I
So as people are listening, watching later, downloading this, when you think about your role as a fixer, and everything that you're doing, also as a professor, right? How can they find you? Number one. Number two is, if they've got questions and they want to understand more about your firm, where do they find you in doing that?
Thank you. So you can find me on LinkedIn, where we are right now, at N Damali Peterman. And you can find me on all social media at Breakthrough ADR. And for anyone who's looking to bring in, to consult with someone with respect to conflict resolution, with respect to training, consulting, to put in place systems, to navigate conflict or address conflict, then that's definitely through Breakthrough ADR, which is on the screen right now, which is awesome. And then for anyone who's looking, and I have a team of people that help me with that. And then if someone's looking to have me to come in as a mediator or an arbitrator, or serve as an ombuds, then they would contact me through JAMS. If you JAMS, just like how it sounds, delicious, JAMS, you would contact me there, just putting in my name and JAMS, and my profile will come up with reference to my case manager. And that's how you can find me. But what I am here for is not just, that. I'm here to also say that I want to be a resource. I want to help other people who are navigating conflict. I want to help other business owners who are like just trying to figure out what to do from day to day. I want to help other women who look like me and who don't look like me, who are just like, today was a good day, or today, there were these challenges, and I just want to like talk to someone about it. And so to me, again, the community aspect of with what you do, Cate, I mean, like what you have done, switching over to Luminary, from a very impressive career in banking and rocking it out of the park, with Luminary, and what you've built both domestically and globally, the opportunities that you provide for all of these different cohorts you're putting together through your partnerships that you've created and nurtured even throughout the pandemic. It's just so impressive. And so I want to follow your lead and just continue to give back however I can.
Well, you're already doing that, right? And I think we both knew from the moment we sat next to each other on that panel, and I believe that was through we.nyc, if I'm not mistaken, where I just knew that you were a force I knew that immediately just listening to your story and how you were working with your clients and how you were helping others, that I wanted to know more. And so equally, I am, you were one of the first to reach out to me too, after the death of George Floyd, and certainly in preparation for the election results. Cate, how can I help your community? How can I be there for the community? How can I help others have these conversations? And so equally, a massive thanks to you for just being there for the Luminary community and always opening up your, virtual doors. And hopefully in 2022, we can see each other again in person and have you back in the space. But I will just say, for anyone out there, whether it's you're going through a crisis, you're going through a conflict, you're just trying to figure out how to communicate some of these extraordinary things that we're going through. Damali is your woman. She is your leader. She is just such an expert. I sit on a lot of boards, and anytime there's a crisis that comes up, I'm sort of like, all right, are we talking to Breakthrough or are we talking to Damali? So equally, the love is shared through the screen both ways. And I just thank you for making time to do this. I know we've had lots of just challenges on the schedule, but we're here. And as Damali mentioned, everyone follow her, Breakthrough ADR. She is on LinkedIn and is an extremely impactful thought leader as well. So follow her, follow the company, and like she said, JAMS, JAMS. And hopefully we'll see you soon. Have a wonderful holiday, Damali, and sending much love through the screen.
Thank you, Cate. Have a great holiday. All the best to you, and I can't wait to see you in person.
Yes, here's to 2022.
Sounds good.
All right, take care. Bye-bye. Everyone, thank you. This was the last Goaldigger of the season. We will be back in January. Have a very happy and healthy holiday. Healthy being the key word. Stay safe. And I won't go on my soapbox about your vaccination, but please protect not only yourself, but others around you. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays. Everything. We'll see you all in 2022. Take care.